This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Today, I'm joined by author, poet and disability activist Bethany Handley to talk about her experiences of being in nature. We explore what it means to rediscover nature through a disabled body, why accessibility benefits everyone, and how rethinking the way we design our landscapes can create richer, more welcoming places for people and wildlife alike.
I'm an author, poet and disability activist. I've just written a book called My Body is a Meadow, which is about my journey as a new wheelchair user, rediscovering the landscapes that raised me.
Excellent. We'll get on to the book, but I just wanted to make sure that I get the terminology right, because I historically have been taught to say person with disabilities, but I think you prefer not to use that term, do you?
Yeah, so I use disabled person because it's a social model, so I'm disabled by society. And then I have impairments, which are my conditions. And I'm a full-time wheelchair user, and I'm also tube fed, and happy to talk about how, I use chronic illness as terms as well.
Okay, yeah, I mean, please feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong. It's all a learning curve for me. The disabled person aspect. So that basically means that anyone who's disabled is disabled not necessarily because of what they're living with, but because of the way that society is structured. Is that right?
Yeah, so as a wheelchair user, I'm not disabled by being a wheelchair user or by the fact that my legs don't work. I'm disabled by steps, for example, or the fact that someone hasn't cut a footpath. And that's what creates disability. So disability is the barriers that an individual experiences. And that can be attitudinal as well, rather than looking at it as the condition. But it's not saying that it's not hard to live with a condition. I don't love being tube fed, but it's not what's disabling me. It's the fact that a workplace wouldn't adjust for tube feed, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to sort of go a little bit more into that. How could a workplace be better adapted for you, for example?
It would be about being able to have lots of breaks or having a flexible work day. I don't know when I'm going to be able to tolerate feed, for example. So I don't work 9 to 5, writing is my job. So I'm able to adapt that. But I'd find it quite hard going to an office, for example, and being able to maintain my tube feeding all day without taking breaks. And I work very strange hours around my health.
I think people, particularly employers, struggle with the idea that people don't do this conventional 9 to 5 workday. But that seems like a very outdated model of structure in a workplace because so many people have different constraints.
Oh, definitely. So many people have caring responsibilities, don't they? Or so many of us live with health conditions. 25% of the population is disabled. So yeah, I don't think it suits many people, actually, this model of having to work 9 to 5. I found I'm much more productive. I did used to work a 9 to 5. I'm much more productive now when I can work when it suits me, at the hours that it suits me, and do more intensive work and then have lots of rest periods. And that just works better for me.
Yeah. So you've written the book, which you mentioned, and I wondered, who did you write the book for? I always ask that question of authors because I'm really intrigued to know, you're telling a story. Who is it for?
That's a great question. So it's partly for disabled people. So when I became a wheelchair user, I was lying in hospital and I had no idea what would be possible for my body going forwards. I'd never seen representation of wheelchair users in the outdoors. I'd never seen representation of wheelchair users or disabled people more broadly in film or media, really, other than in Me Before You, which is pretty awful, tragic representation, or in Avatar, which is awful representation as well, where you've got a wheelchair user who'd rather leave Earth and become an alien than stay on Earth. So I didn't know what was possible, and doctors didn't help me learn what was possible. They weren't ambitious for me. They didn't dream. So I want people to be able to read this book when they're in that position, lying in a hospital bed with no idea if they'll ever be able to access the outdoors again, and realise actually it's not their body that is the problem. It's not their health condition. It's the fact that we've put up styles and kissing gates. But it's also equally for non-disabled people. I want everyone to look at how we gatekeep nature and how we can open up nature to everyone, and how that in turn protects biodiversity and will protect the natural world around us when everyone can experience that sense of awe and wonder in nature. And yeah, I think just realising that we all have a part to play, especially those people who can walk with ease across the footpath and never have to wonder about if they're going to have to turn back because of a style or a kissing gait or because it hasn't been properly maintained. And to think, oh, could I kick away that branch, for example? There's a difference between someone being able to go on that walk or someone having to return home. So we've all got a massive part to play in opening up green and blue spaces for everyone.
Yeah, I was going to come on to this later, actually, but seeing as you have mentioned it, you make a really interesting point about path material and the fear that accessible paths aren't environmentally friendly. I think some people think, we're going to have to put down some sort of tarmac path across the countryside in order for it to be traversable. Where do you think that perception comes from, and why is it false?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. The biggest criticism, I'd say, of my activism is that I'm advocating for beauty spots to have tarmac across them. That is not what I'm advocating for at all. I think I assumed before being a wheelchair user that to make nature accessible, we needed flat level tarmac paths, that we needed, and like urban nature being the most accessible, for example. I mean, that is accessible for a lot of people, but if you've got the right equipment, the terrain is not necessarily that disabling. So I've been really lucky to get funding for an all-terrain wheelchair. And even before having an all-terrain wheelchair, with people pushing, I'm able to get over a lot of mud and grass. I go surfing again. I'm able to get over the sand with people there to help me. But actually, what's really shutting me out of the spaces that I grew up in rural South Wales, being able to hike and climb and surf without these barriers, was suddenly realising that within a mile of my house, there are 7 styles on the paths around me. So I actually can't get onto any of the paths from my house because my body has literally been designed out of those paths by styles that don't really need to exist. So yeah, we don't actually need tarmac paths. They're great when they are there. But I live next to a meadow, for example, and we perhaps regenerate this beautiful meadow and we mow a path through the meadow. It's got a public right of way through the meadow. And actually, when you mow that path, it means that not only can I, as a wheelchair user, enjoy the meadow, enjoy the biodiversity of the meadow, and be able to help conserve it, but it means that all walkers, we get school routes coming through, it means people stick to the path and don't go off and trample the wildflowers whilst making it accessible to everyone. So we don't necessarily need what a lot of people think we need to make spaces accessible. It's more about removing these barriers that physically shut people out, and also expecting diversity is a massive part of it as well. We don't design the space for people, and we can challenge people's presence there. So I get a lot of comments, a lot of jokes on my wheels, like, oh, watch out, Speedy, rather than people saying like, lovely weather. I don't get that small talk anymore because people just don't expect me to be there. My presence is a shock.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the interactions you've had with people, and honestly, I was fairly horrified by what you deal with when you are out and about. As you say, they'll make a comment about how you're moving, but they don't say, how you doing? Oh, did you hear the cuckoo over there? Or, that sort of thing. And I think you said that people are looking at you thinking, how would I deal with that? I'm paraphrasing you, but I think that's probably a fair accusation. What would you want to see people do? Just literally make the time of day with you and not be commenting on your disability? Is that what you would prefer?
Yeah, I want people to remark on the fact that we've both just heard a peregrine falcon near Cinnabar, or comment on the weather. Like, I miss these interactions. I have to initiate them now because people often will comment on my wheelchair instead. I think there's something about being a young disabled person, especially. So I'm a wheelchair user. I'm also tube fed, and my feeding tube's taped to my face. It's quite obvious that I live with medical conditions. And I think it challenges people's assumptions. People are curious and well-intentioned and want to know my story. They want to know what happened. They want to understand. And I do think it makes some people reflect on their own mortality as well. So I just want everyone to know that we are all disabled or pre-disabled. We all become disabled at some point in our lives. It is a natural thing. My disabled body is still a natural body, and we shouldn't be questioning people when we're out and about. Like, I don't want to share my life story when I want to just be wheeling down a path in the forest or surfing or spending time with my family outside.
That's a very fair point. So you spoke about styles and the design aspect, which is a really important point to make. And it's not your problem to solve, actually, at the end of the day. And I always think, when people say, oh, what would you prefer instead? Well, you're the designer, you're the land manager, you come up with a solution. And I think particularly styles and things are very historically used, and we've become used to bunging them in as a solution to keeping livestock in, and people, they don't shut gates, for example, that could be a problem. Have you ever come across anything alternative that works?
Yeah, so if there's no livestock in a field, we don't really need a barrier. I think we need to change our mentality and to stop trying to mark boundaries in the same way and just leave a gap, because a gap is always more accessible to people. And I think if we have got livestock in a field and we do need some sort of gate or style, I don't think there's ever an excuse to install a style. If people are bizarrely attached to a style, leave it and put a gate next to it. But I can get, if I've got someone with me, I can get through just the usual farm gate. That's fine, as long as someone else can open it for me. But a self-closing gate is great. I can get through it. Livestock probably won't get through it. I'm seeing a lot of styles being taken out and replaced with kissing gates, which I have the same problem. I need to be picked up and physically carried through a kissing gate, and then for someone to go get in my wheelchair, carry that through, pick me up again, put me back in it. It's just not accessible. But the main thing, I think, is changing our attitude and our assumptions that we need to think it's not a bad thing to have public access. I think some landowners, maybe some conservationists as well, are scared of public access maybe for everyone, and we kind of gatekeep who we trust to be allowed in these spaces, and therefore we're looking at who we don't trust to be in these spaces. And I don't feel like I'm trusted as a wheelchair user to be present in a lot of these spaces, and I've had a lot of comments about that because people are scared of, I guess, livestock being disturbed or litter or damage to ecology. But actually, in my experience and through the work I've done with landowners and councils, the more people that can access a space and that are taught to respect and feel awe in that space and want to protect the ecology, the more people are motivated to protect it. So actually, when we try and restrict movement through these spaces because we fear antisocial behaviour and motorbikes, for example, I don't think we're helping. I don't think we keep it out. We actually need more people and all generations, all abilities to be able to access spaces to conserve them.
And also, obviously, I focus on gardening. And another thing that struck me when I was reading the book was, and I've worked in gardens like this, a lot of gardens, particularly if they're a historic garden space and you want to visit, it's almost impossible to adapt them without changing the original design. So for example, if it's a conservation garden and, it's being conserved because it was designed in this particular way, how do you get around that?
Yeah, I think there's ways to preserve features and add other paths, and also not always asking for, like as I was saying earlier, not always asking for tarmac, really accessible paths to be put in. It can be as simple as mowing a path across a lawn, and that means that, I know grass isn't the best surface for all wheelchair users, but it's better than nothing. So I think you can often put in alternatives. Like there's some historic gates around here, for example, and you could just put in another gate next to it. You don't have to take it out, just provide an alternative for people. But yeah, I think usually our answers, we just got to be creative and problem solve. And actually, it'll probably make the experience better for everyone.
I agree. And one of the worst things that I ever did at the start of my design career was design a garden at a show that was not accessible to wheelchair users. And one of the very first people that came along who wanted, and it was inside, so you couldn't see it without getting into it. And I will never, ever forget that day. It was just awful. And I really hope that that informed my design going forwards and how I thought about everybody when I worked in a space. But I don't think there's enough emphasis on that taught for people who are working in landscapes. I mean, do you think it's getting better?
Slightly. I think you see some places that do a really good job. Like the National Trust is doing a fantastic job at trying to make their grounds accessible to people, including places that you wouldn't expect. So I was in Bude last week and I managed to get up onto the cliff top because the National Trust had put in quite wide gates next to their kissing gates. So I was able to get back up to a cliff top, which is a place I never thought I'd access again when I lost the use of my legs. And a lot of the National Trust gardens are beautifully accessible and they have planting on different levels, which is great for wheelchair users. And yeah, it's better for all ages as well. So I do think we're seeing progress, but not enough's being done. I didn't have anywhere to live when I came out of hospital. So I built a tiny home on my parents' drive. I was very fortunate that I could do that. And I've got a tiny accessible garden on the decking outside. And I couldn't find any information really about how to make a small garden that was going to be accessible to me. There was some information about, for example, if you're older and you don't want to bend down so much, but I couldn't really find anything for like an active wheelchair user. So I do think there's a gap there. I had to do a lot of problem solving and try a lot of things out before I got to the right setup.
Yeah, I mean, there are resources out there for designers, but I think probably it's very underexplored and sometimes not considered unless there happens to be a client or a garden user who has needs that need to be accounted for. But just in general, I think probably, yeah, we do need to do a lot better. Have you ever visited any public gardens apart from the National Trust, in your area where you've thought, actually, this was really well done or this has been really well adapted?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm thinking of a few National Trust sites around here that have got beautiful gardens that are accessible. And they've got all-terrain scooters you can borrow as well. So I always direct people to National Trust sites. Yeah, I can't think off the top of my head.
No. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. I mean, that probably speaks volumes maybe in itself.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the book, it's a bit of an aside, but I was really intrigued by it. And I think it ties in with the title of the book. And that is the idea of a hospital field and how that works, how that came about. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so it's quite an ancient concept in Wales where farmers would maintain a hospital field for their livestock. So it'd be a flower-rich, diverse field that they'd maintain that sick animals could go and graze in. And the idea was that many animals will know what plants they need to help heal them. And I played on this concept. When I came out of hospital, we had an overgrazed field by our house. And over the years, as I've been getting stronger, not healing, but getting stronger and learning to live with my chronic conditions, this beautiful meadow has bloomed and become more and more diverse every year. So yeah, trying to celebrate that and how it mirrors learning to accept and find this radical acceptance whilst living with life-changing illnesses.
I don't want to give too much away about the kind of final chapter of the book, but can you summarise why you feel like your body is a meadow?
Yeah, so when you become ill, you're often told to fight your illness. We hear it a lot around cancer, don't we? People should battle the illness, fight their illness. And it helps some people, but for me, that was quite a destructive way to look at illness. It's in every cell in my body, my conditions. They're not going to be cured. I'm always going to live with them. So I found that most kindest and radical thing for me was to accept my conditions and realise that my disabled body is a beautifully resilient, natural body. And to be fighting my body meant surrendering some of my quality of life. But if I spent all my time in intensive physio to try and regain a tiny bit of function, it meant surrendering time outside, time with my loved ones, time writing and doing the things I love, time gardening. So yeah, my body as a meadow is this idea that as a disabled person, I've learned to, I guess, bloom inside my own body, to embrace my own disabled body and realise that actually I love my body. I'm so proud of how resilient it is and what it has survived. And contrary to a lot of nature, I think, it's not about healing. I haven't found that nature's healing. I love being in nature, but I don't really like that transactional relationship with nature. And actually, I'm sicker now than I was when I started writing the book. I'm now completely tube fed. My stomach's paralysed as well as my legs. So yeah, it was learning to accept that and realise that I can be out in nature again.
I mean, we do quite often adopt that combative language on many levels, of discourse. And we do it with gardens. We say, oh, we're waging war on weeds and things. And we're always pitched against something. I guess it goes back to that idea of that we are part of nature, not apart from it. So I love that idea. Talking about kind of your changing abilities and conditions and things, you ask a question in the book of somebody called Amanda, which goes along the lines of what advice would you give to somebody who's newly injured or disabled? And she responds, but what advice would you give?
I would tell someone who is newly injured or has just been diagnosed with an illness that's going to change your life, be ambitious. It's okay to be ambitious and to dream, and you are more resilient than you think you are. And surround yourself with all your loved ones. And we all need to acknowledge that when you have a life-changing illness or experience or any form of loss or grief, it doesn't just transform you, it transforms every single person in your support network. So you need to go through it together. Like my family are all completely different people to the people who were by my side when I was first diagnosed. We're much closer. I'm closer with my friends, and we kind of celebrate this interdependence, the same sort of interdependence that we see in the natural world. Like we celebrate the fact we have symbiotic relationships and that they care for me, but I also care for them in different ways. So yeah, be ambitious, dream, try new things. I've tried water skiing and adaptive surfing, and the other day I managed to get onto a mountain ridge at a mountain summit in my all-terrain wheelchair, despite not thinking I'd be able to do that. So yeah, take risks. I think we often treat people as if they're fragile when we're diagnosed with life-changing illnesses. And I know that I could end up back in hospital at any minute, but I need to take risks and celebrate this life, because no one knows how long we're here for. So we need to make the most of every single minute on this beautiful planet.
And so with that in mind, what's next on your agenda? How are you going to be interacting with nature more?
Oh, I want to do lots more hikes. I'm pushing myself more and more with my partner there to catch if my wheelchair topples. So I want to explore. I'm trying to find more hikes in the Black Mountains where I grew up, and also trying to develop my garden. I'm starting to grow veg again and herbs, even though I can't eat them, just for the joy of it. So I'm going to be outside all summer, hopefully.
Thanks to Bethany for sharing her story and insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, you might also like episode 366, Universal Qualities of Healing Gardens, and episode 239, Growing Biodiversity. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his insect of the week.
The Cinnabar moth. Scientific name, Thyrea jacobii. So today's insect of the week is a very famous moth with a very famous relationship to a plant. At the minute, I'm seeing quite a lot of this moth in the caterpillar form, a few adults still lingering around, and the plant association is common ragwort. So ragwort is a topic for another podcast and has been covered in other places, but this is about the moth and its relationship with this plant. It's not the only plant that it has a relationship with, but it's the most common association for the caterpillars. And common ragwort is quite closely related to common groundsel, Senecio vulgaris. Common ragwort, the genus has changed from Senecio to jacobii, and the caterpillars will eat both of those plants, so common groundsel and common ragwort. The etymology is quite cool, actually. There's a fair bit going on. So Thyrea comes from ancient Greek, referencing an ancient city, Phoenician city of Tyre, which is part of modern-day Lebanon, as far as I understand it. And it was a place famed for producing crimson-purple dyes. And I think that will be quite obviously related to this beautiful coloration of the adult moth, which has this reddy crimson and black coloration on the adult. The second word in the scientific name, jacobii, which is a very difficult one to pronounce, I have to double check it, refers to the host plant. So jacobii vulgaris is common ragwort. The synonym is Senecio vulgaris, as I mentioned. So cinnabar moth as well, the common name is also quite interesting. So cinnabar is a red mineral known as cinnabar. That's where it gets its name from. And that's an ore of mercury. So there's all sorts of stuff going on with this naming of the common name and the scientific name. It's quite a widely distributed moth in the UK and Ireland. The only place it might not be found is perhaps northern Scotland, or the northernmost tip of Scotland. So it's very famous in respect of ragwort. Common ragwort is very toxic to livestock. It contains toxic alkaloids. So that's where it gets a big reputation. As we know, most animals won't eat plants with toxic alkaloids because they taste horrific when they start to eat them, and they know. And they learn very quickly, but it's the issue of cut hay where they sometimes have an issue. So animals, whether it's livestock or wild animals, usually, obviously some exceptions, are very understanding of wild plants with toxic alkaloids. But the cinnabar moth, its caterpillars, are completely reliant on this plant and the very closely related common groundsel. And you'll see at this time of year in the summer, you'll see the caterpillars devouring the ragwort, and it's an incredible sight to see. The caterpillars are yellow and black, brightly coloured, also indicating that they're full of toxins. So they're eating the plant full of toxins, absorbing them into their own bodies. They've evolved with these plants. And that deters avian predators and other predators potentially from eating them because they look very toxic. And through evolution, animals have learned, evolutionarily speaking, to not eat things that look toxic. So that's another cool little facet of it. So as I mentioned, the adults have this kind of slate black and red coloration. People often confuse burnet moths with cinnabar moths, so be careful with that one. There's quite a few different species of, burnet moth is at least 2 of the really common species, and there's some subspecies as well. So the 5 and 6 spot burnet moths, very similar coloration, but burnet moths have more spots rather than stripes. So the adult cinnabar moth has 2 red spots, but then the rest of it's striped on the rounded forewings, whereas 5 and 6 spot burnet moths will have 5 or 6 on the wings. So try and get your eye on those and avoid that confusion. You could see all of those moths flying in the daytime, day-flying moths, which is cool. So now is the time to look at the ragwort and the groundsel for these caterpillars. It's really important we record their distribution and approximate numbers. It's a moth that I've not seen in Zone 2 London in the community garden I look after in Eden, much to my frustration, but I think it's an example of either a heavily urbanised area deterring them from existing there, or I simply don't have the scale and abundance of the plant for it to deem it worthwhile. So if you haven't got the scale or the abundance of a species as a host plant, then that species of moth might not lay eggs on it, feeling that its young won't have enough nutrition to develop and survive. So another interesting point really on abundance and critical mass of species. So yeah, do let me know if you see this exciting moth in adult form or the caterpillars. That's what you want to be keeping an eye out for at the minute, both. There's fewer moths now because there's lots of caterpillars. So yeah, do, as always, record on the apps. I record an iNaturalist. I hope you see one.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.